Welcome to Catholic Feedback. I'm your host, Keith Nestor. On this podcast, we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith with everyday life. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Down to Earth Ministry, a ministry of stewardship, a mission of faith, and by the generous support of our patrons. For more information, please visit downtoearthministry.org. That's down, the number 2, earthministry.org. Let's get to it. Welcome to Catholic Feedback. I'm Keith Nestor. I'm so excited that you've joined me here for this episode of our podcast. This is the podcast where we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith to everyday life, and we do that through answering your questions and comments. So if you have a question, something you'd like me to tackle, please email that to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. I want to say a special thank you to all of our patrons who are making this podcast possible. Thank you for your support, your generosity. I want you to know how much it means to me, and I am encouraging all of you, if this is content that is helping you in your faith, please share this content and consider joining our Patreon team. You can find it by patreon.com/Keith Nestor. Okay, today's episode, this is an episode, to be honest with you, I have resisted making. In fact, I've talked myself out of making this podcast episode several times, and the thought came to me, well, you know what? I just need to do it, because what I'm here to do is answer your questions. I'm not just here to give you a monologue and just give you my thoughts, but to interact with the things that you're saying. And some things people are going to ask me that are not really going to be things I'm going to deal with, but many of them are going to be things that I feel like I need to at least weigh in on as a new Catholic, as a convert, as someone who has spent so much of my life in the Protestant ministry and has now become a Catholic. These are questions that people bring to the table. And this one in particular is one I really struggle with, because it has to deal with what we're supposed to do with things said by Pope Francis. Now, I know full well right now, there are many of you or many people that are going to decide a lot of things about me based on what I had to say about Pope Francis. There are people that, if you are too pro Pope Francis, they're immediately going to write you off as some sort of modernist that doesn't care about the traditional Catholic faith. And then on the other side, there are plenty of people that if you say anything negative about anything Pope Francis does or says, then you're some sort of crazy rad trad, and you just want to see the hierarchy of the church completely leveled and start over. And I've wrestled with that because, you know, when you come into a situation, it's especially a public situation, as I have done in the last year, people want to decide about you, and they want to know which camp to put you in. And it's interesting how people decide where you belong. Oftentimes, I've found that it has to do with, they'll ask questions like, well, do you like this guy? Or do you listen to this person? Or what did you think of this book? Or what about this? Or do you attend this kind of mass? Or do you take communion in this way? We have all of these different litmus tests that we put on people to really decide whether or not they are part of our tribe or part of the enemy tribe. And my default in life is to try not to be someone who is, you know, in a tribe, so to speak, and especially someone who lives their life in an echo chamber only filled with people who agree with me exactly, and we just keep saying the same stuff over and over again, surrounding ourselves only with people who think exactly like we do, people who agree with us, and then we just live to demonize the opposing side. So if you're a person who tends to be like, all right, it's my team versus the other team, and then within Catholicism, we want to set up our own teams, you might wrestle with some of the things I have to say, no matter which team you're on. That's not been my goal, as has to been to establish a team or a tribe. My team or my tribe is, I'm Team Jesus, and I am tribe Roman Catholic Church, which in and of itself is enough to drive some people crazy. So I know full well, and I know I'm saying a lot in this disclaimer here, that dealing with questions about how we're supposed to relate to things done and said by Pope Francis is probably going to get me in some hot water with some people. And I think, to be honest with you, that was part of the reason why I've wrestled with talking about things like this, because, I mean, let's just face it, nobody wants to be judged and marginalized. There's a part of me that's afraid of that. There's a part of me that doesn't want to be simply dismissed as being part of one tribe or another. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to just say nothing. Well, I've decided that I can't really do that if I'm going to host a podcast where people send in their questions and comments and I deal with them. So we're just going to jump in, and I have to be okay with whatever you decide to do with me. I don't live for what you decide to do with me. I live for Jesus, and I preach that message a lot, but I have to live into that right now myself. So what I'm going to ask of you is this. Before you write me off as either a modernist or some crazy rad trad person, I want you to listen to everything I have to say and then really do some soul searching as to your own heart and where you fall on with these things. And ask yourself this question. Do I really think through the things that I believe, or do I just let somebody else on social media tell me what I have to believe? And then instantly I'm like, okay, I got my marching orders now. Here's who I have to be against. Boom, let's go. My encouragement to you is to work through these things with the Holy Spirit in the counsel of the church and the counsel of other believers, and come to your own conclusions based on what you feel to be the closest thing to the truth and how you should relate to it. Now, that's not to say that it's just all wishy-washy and whatever it is, but what I find to be the case is that very few of us actually do that hard work of coming up with our own opinions and thinking for ourselves. It's much easier just to look at our favorite Catholic blogger or Catholic YouTube guy or whatever and go, well, whatever they say, that's what I'm going with because I like them and I don't want to be on the opposite end of what they're saying. Don't live like that. Remember, we serve Jesus Christ, and He is the audience of our lives. He's the one to whom we will give an account and the one who will judge us in the end. Okay, so there's my disclaimer. I realize I can't control what you do, but I'm just throwing that out there. So let's get to the question. And I know I'm probably a month or two late to this party because this question came to me back in mid-May 2020, and a lot of the events have sort of blown over and people are moving on to other things, but this is still a question that a lot of people are talking about. So here it is. Belinda writes this question. Hello, I'm Catholic and I'm finding it difficult to understand the recent Pope's call to all religions for prayer. It seems to be putting our God on a level with theirs, even though technically there are no other gods. How do you understand this? And how can I explain this to Protestant friends? Thank you. God bless. Belinda. Okay, so what Belinda is talking about is what happened on March 14th in the year 2020 when, in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, Pope Francis issues a call to basically everyone of all religions to pray for an end to the coronavirus. Well, I'm going to read you exactly what he said, and I found this in two places. One, there's an article on the Vatican's website, and then there's, of course, a tweet put out by Pope Francis. Let's look at the article first. It says this: at the weekly general audience, Pope Francis appealed for the Day of Prayer on May 14th, launched by the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity. Okay, so there's this committee out there called the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity. The committee is made up of leaders from various religious traditions, okay? And here's what this says. Quote, prayer is a means to communicate with and listen to God. In this spirit, I have welcomed the invitation of the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity to dedicate tomorrow, May 14th, to prayer, fasting, and works of charity. I invite and encourage everyone to join in this event. May we unite as brothers and sisters in asking the Lord to save humanity from the pandemic, to enlighten scientists, and to heal the sick. May the Lord bless each of you and always protect you from evil. So that was the article on the Vatican website. And then let's look at Pope Francis' tweet. Let's see what he said here. On his tweet on May 14th, he said, all of us, brothers and sisters of every religious tradition, unite today for the day of prayer, fasting, and penance called by the Higher Committee for Human Fraternity. So then I think that he he links to that. And then, of course, the day before that, this is related. He says, prayer belongs to everyone, to men and women of every religion, and probably even to those who profess no religion. Prayer is born within the secrecy of our being, in that interior place that spiritual writers often call the heart. Okay, so for some people, that all of that comes across as incredibly troubling because what it seems to imply. Now, for other people, they just go, oh, that's nice. Everybody pray. Well, I think what I've seen in a lot of people's responses to this, and of course, I think Belinda, in your response to this, is this troubling idea that Pope Francis seems to be, according to what people are interpreting here, that he seems to be taking the view that all religions are on the same level and that prayer to, one of the many million Hindu gods is just as valid as prayer to Jesus. Prayer to God the Father, to the Christian God, the God that we worship in Catholicism. And of course, that's a troubling thought, isn't it? Because it's the most basic of all Catholic teaching that there is one God and he's the triune God and Jesus Christ is the second person of the Trinity and that no one comes to God but through Christ. So obviously we have this 2,000-year tradition of the most basic tenet of the Christian faith that Jesus is God and there's one God and only one God. And now we see the Holy Father, Pope Francis, calling everybody to prayer to end this coronavirus pandemic. And at face value, many people have taken this to mean, or taken this to say that Pope Francis meant that it really doesn't matter who you pray to because all religions are the same and all gods are equal. Now, here's the deal. Can I sit here and say that's exactly what Pope Francis meant when he said that? I really honestly can't say that. And guess what? Nobody else can too. I think following this, there was another instance where Pope Francis said, does this mean religious relativism? And he said, no, it doesn't mean that. But that isn't enough to basically calm the concerns of many people. And of course, a lot of Protestants, if you look at the Pope's Twitter feed, a lot of Protestants basically just like, nope, you're the Antichrist. Nope, we're not going to participate in idolatry. Nope, you've just proven yourself to be, basically a follower of some world religion. All religions are the same type of apocalyptic thing. And boom, dismissal. And to be honest with you, this has been a struggle for a lot of us Catholics who are faithful and devoted to the church, who have relationships with Protestants, who are coming to us going, dude, check out what your Pope said. He just basically called everybody to prayer and saying that all religions are equal. And I can tell you what, that's troubling, isn't it, Belinda? Because how do you answer a Protestant when they come to you with something that the Pope said that's so troubling? But here's the deal. Like I said, I don't get to sit down with Pope Francis and say, well, what exactly did you mean by this? And where were you coming from this? And more importantly, do you believe, Pope Francis, that all religions are equally valid and all lead to heaven or whatever? See, I don't get to do that. I don't get to call him up or respond with him. He doesn't text me back and all of this. So I'm put in a position, which is, as we all are, where we have to try to judge what he meant when he said that, which I think is going to get us in some trouble. Now, I know what people are saying was, well, Keith, if this was just an isolated incident, then, we could sort of look through this, but it doesn't seem to be an isolated incident, does it? It seems like there's lots of things that Pope Francis is reported to have said that indicate troubling things. For example, there was when Pope Francis said that God wills the diversity of all religions in the same way that he wills the diversity of races and genders and all of this, that he clumps religion into that. And that was taken to mean by many that God somehow has willed all of these different religions for whatever purposes they seek. And of course, he clarified that later to say that was meant to mean God's permissive will and that God allows it, but not God's, intentional will. Well, do you think that satisfied people? Not really. Because here's the thing that I've noticed about what happens in Catholic culture sometimes. People have a mindset about Pope Francis, and they're either going to aspire everything positive to him or they're going to aspire everything negative to him. And it seems like we're often taking sides when it comes to the Holy Father of is he even the Pope? I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about that. Is he even really the Pope, or was something done in a strange way that negates his papacy? Other people want to say, well, do we even really have a Pope anymore? Isn't the chair of Peter vacant since all of these reforms were made to the church and the rite of ordination has been changed? All of these things. I mean, you can find the gamut, all within people, by the way, who claim to be faithful Catholics. It's crazy. Now, personally, for me, this is like super troubling, stressful to me, because I came into the church because of this issue of authority. And in many ways, because of the issues around what the Bible teaches and what history teaches about the papacy. So for me, it was like, that's what brought me in. And now all of a sudden, there's like this bait and switch where, hey, everybody, you guys have become Catholic because we have the rock of Peter, and we have the promise from God that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. And we have this promise of papal infallibility. So come join us, which I said, yes, sign me up, to great expense, by the way. And then now you're going to tell me that the Pope is somehow some sort of, one world religion guy and a heretic even, or doesn't believe the true teaching of the church. Well, what am I supposed to do with that? This is a troubling question, isn't it, Belinda? And it's not just troubling for how we're supposed to respond to our Protestant brothers and sisters, which I'll get to in a minute, but it's troubling for any faithful Catholic who sees these things and hears these things and doesn't know what to make of it. Now, I know I'm supposed to be, because I have the podcast, right? I'm supposed to be the guy that gives you the answer. Is that fair to say? Maybe. Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to be sorely disappointed in this episode if you came to here thinking that I'm going to be able to answer this question in some definitive way, because nobody's been able to really answer this question in a definitive way. What I'm going to be here to do is like what I'm here to do every week, is to help you connect this to your everyday life. And guess what, friends? There are things that have to do with our Catholic faith that are hard to connect to our everyday life. Not because we can't figure out how to make it fit, but because we don't understand it sometimes. And you can be a person who pretends they understand it and pretends they have it all figured out and say, oh, well, yeah, I get it. It all makes sense to me. You can be that guy if you want. Have at it. That's not me. And I'm not going to pretend that it is. But what I am going to do, and what I feel like I'm called to do with this podcast and with my ministry, is to do the best I can to be an obedient son of the church and ultimately to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. So how do we walk through this? Let's talk specifically about this. Now, can we give Pope Francis the benefit of the doubt with this call to universal prayer? Because we've already stated the objection, right? The objection is that he's basically calling every religious person of whatever, and even non-religious people, just pray to your God to end the coronavirus, and that's something we want to do. And of course, that comes across as endorsing false religion. So that's one response to it. Now, the other response to it is to say, well, to ask the question really, is that really what Pope Francis was actually doing when he's responding to this invitation by this higher committee, or whatever it's called, of human fraternity, okay? Higher committee of human fraternity, right? Okay. So Pope Francis responding to this, is that exactly what he's doing? Now, some people look at that and say, no. The fact that he was responding to this invitation to call everybody to prayer in no way at all indicates that he believes that all gods are on equal footing and that there's nothing unique to Christianity or exclusively true about the Catholic faith. It's possible, according to some, that the call to universal prayer does not necessarily endorse a belief or an appeal to other religions. And I want to give that some airtime. I don't want to just say, no, that can't mean that. I want to explore, if that were indeed true, what that would look like. Because it's kind of an interesting question to ask, isn't it? Now, one thing that we need to do, of course, is look to Scripture and say, is there anything in the Bible that would sort of fit this idea? And the closest thing that I've been able to find was what happens when Paul makes his way into Athens. Now I'm going to be looking at Acts chapter 17 here. And in Acts chapter 17, Paul is working his way through this missionary journey. And it says this, and I'm going to read a few verses here and then pull some stuff out of it. In verse 16, it says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Now, there are some people in this city who are philosophers, and it talks about them, and they want to know what Paul has to say. It says in verse 18, also some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, what does this babbler have to say? Others said, he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities. That was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus and asked him, may we know what this new teaching is you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means. Now all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. So Paul's been invited to speak about this. Now, here's what he says. He stands in front of the Areopagus, I'm probably not saying that right, and said, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of all the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far off from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of you of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think of that deity like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art of imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Okay, so some people look at this text here, and they say, well, you see, even in Paul, he's trying to create common ground here with people in their religious practice. And he's basically taking their religious practice to this unknown God. And Paul's basically saying, look, this unknown God that you worship, that's the real God. And let me tell you about him. And then what does he do? He points them to Jesus. And get this, it says that he commands people everywhere to repent. And then he even says that there's a day coming when they will be judged by this man. And who is the man? It's Jesus. And we know that because of the resurrection of the dead. So a couple things about this text that I want to point out that to me were interesting as I heard people use this to sort of, explain away Pope Francis's call to all nations. Now, let me just make this point. Pope Francis didn't put forth this scripture as the reason why he did what he did. This is what some people have done to try to put their spin on it. And I think that there's a part of it where that might line up. And I think that there's a lot of it where it doesn't line up. Let me just start with the beginning. Okay. First of all, it says in verse 16, at the very beginning of this discourse, while Paul was in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So instantly we see Paul's mindset. He's not walking around Athens going, oh, isn't this great? All these people worship all these other gods. Let's all be friends and let's all link arms together and pray together. It's not what he's doing. It says that he's deeply distressed by this fact. He's looking around. He's going, idolatry is sinful and horribly offensive to God. It's wrong. And when he looks around and sees all these idols, he doesn't go, oh, well, that's nice. Tell me more about your idols. So first of all, we have to level the playing field a little bit and recognize what's going on here. And I'm not going to speak for Pope Francis, but what I am going to say is I don't think that in this call to prayer, there's an element of Pope Francis being distressed by the other gods that all religions everywhere pray to. Okay? I'm not saying that in his heart he's not distressed by that. I'm just saying that in this call to prayer, there doesn't seem to be this level of like, hey, I'm really distressed by the fact that everyone here in these other religions worship false gods. He doesn't go there. So to me, right away, if you're going to jump to this text, you got to be honest that the mindset of Paul is coming from a completely different mindset of what you're trying to attribute to Pope Francis. Okay, now, what I do think could be in line here with what Pope Francis does is he's trying to basically find that which we have in common and acknowledge that it is good. Okay, and that's most of like what I saw in the tweet where he said that prayer belongs to everybody. Prayer isn't just for one religion. It's for people of even no religion, okay? And he's pointing to, and this is what I think is interesting. He's trying to take the concept of prayer and equate it to this universal longing that we all have for God. And I think that that's something that we can't argue against. I don't think that we can argue that only people who are Catholics or Christians have a longing for God. You see, clearly and it's part of our apologetics narrative, is to say, look through history, look through anthropology, look at all cultures everywhere throughout time, and recognize that everywhere in the heart of human beings lies this desire for a relationship with the Creator. That is a good, godly thing put into us by God. That's general revelation, right? We have received, every human being everywhere. Look at Romans 1, talks about that none of us have excuse to say that there is no God because God's built that into the human heart. And I think what we see happening in Paul's discourse here, part of it is to appeal to this desire, this good desire that human beings have to connect with the divine. I think that's what Pope Francis was trying to do with this. Now, once you get past that, I think we go this way. Okay, I think that it's clear that the Apostle Paul then, his motivation isn't to, he's not trying to solve some world crisis that is facing everybody. He's trying to preach the gospel. Okay? Pope Francis, on the other hand, is interacting with a group of people who have come together who, in essence, are responding to the understanding that science is going to get us out of this predicament with the coronavirus. You see, that's what these guys were doing in this committee of higher fraternity or whatever, is they're responding to the idea that we don't need faith, we just need science, and science will get us out of it. They're coming forth and saying, no, we do need science, but we also need faith. So let's unite that idea together and acknowledge that faith and prayer is important. To be honest with you, that's all I think Pope Francis was trying to do. I don't think Pope Francis was trying to preach a sermon about the exclusivity of Christianity. I don't think he was trying to say, well, let me tell you that all gods are equal. I think what he's trying to do at the basic level is to say there's something going on in the human heart that knows that God is real. And whatever your expression of is that, follow that in prayer. That's all I think he was trying to do. Now, how do you feel about that? How do I feel about that? Well, I tell you what. I think if I can just grab a hold of the things I can agree with that, I'm okay. But I do find that it's difficult to explain that to Protestants who've already decided in their mind that the Catholic Church is evil and that Pope Francis is a liberal modernist who's trying to destroy Christianity and bring us all under a one world religion. What's interesting to me is that a lot of the Protestants have a lot in common with the super hardcore rad-trad Catholics or even the Sedevacantists who want to say, which they're the ones that don't believe we have a pope right now, so they don't even call Pope Francis the Pope. they want to just dismiss him and say, well, yeah, you see, look at what he's teaching. It's clearly heresy, and it's clearly wrong. So therefore, he can't be the Pope or is not the Pope or whatever. I think it's interesting that the Protestant position and the rad trad position, the sedevacantist position, and I'm not saying those two are the same position, but they're all sort of on the same page by looking at Francis going, yeah, we're throwing him under the bus. And that's a struggle, honestly, because when people want to talk and debate, wouldn't it be nice to be able to hold up Pope Francis as this foundation of traditional Catholic and timeless Christian truth and nothing more? Yeah, that would be great. And guess what? We struggle to do that, don't we? Because of some of the things that are said and some of the way that it's said. And let's be real, some of the things that he doesn't say, but people say that he says. Okay, and of course, we've seen examples of this where people would say that Pope Francis denied the existence of hell, and he would say, no, I did not. So then they have this, fake news types of I was misinterpreted thing. It's my point is this. Myself, I can't be the Pope-splainer for the Protestant world. I can't do that. And here's the deal. I don't think you can do it either, Belinda. I don't think that's your job. I don't think that you should be put in that place, but I know that you are, and I know that I am, and it's tough. So how do we deal with this? Again, it goes back to which tribe do you want to be a part of, or which tribe do you allow yourself to be associated with? This litmus test. If you want to be a super traditional Catholic, you're not supposed to like Pope Francis. But if you don't want to be labeled as some kind of rad trad maniac, then you're supposed to love everything that he says. I tell you what, as a Catholic YouTuber, content creator, that's a tough line to walk, because I know that if I say something critical of Pope Francis, a good chunk of people are just going to walk away from what I'm talking about. Well, other people are going to go, all right, Keith's on our team. Way to go. And it's ridiculous, but it happens. I mean, I get painted into a corner every once in a while, and I hate that. People want to paint me into a corner. They want to say, well, Keith, wait a second. You go to the Latin Mass, right? And for some people, they go, yes, he's with us. And other people go, oh, no, you're not one of those guys, are you? Or people will ask me questions like, well, Keith, which version of the Bible do you read? Do you read the Catholic American Standard Version or the Revised Standard Version or one of these modern versions? Or do you read, the Dewey Reams? Which team are you on? What theologians do you listen to? What other YouTubers are you into? Are you on this side of the debate or are you on that side of the debate? It's tough, man. I don't like being painted into that corner. I don't like that my response is supposed to be handed to me by somebody else and I'm just supposed to parrot that back. But yet, that's where a lot of us wind up. Now, here's the deal. I don't think we should pander to anybody. I think we should be honest. And honestly, when it comes to some of the things that Pope Francis says and does, I think it's awesome. I think he's awesome. And honestly, when it comes to some of the things that Pope Francis says and does, it leaves me scratching my head going, oh, why did he do that? Why couldn't he be more clear? Well, I wish he wouldn't have said that, or I wish he wouldn't have done that. So there you go. Is that okay? Can I live in that place? Am I allowed to have those opinions? Belinda, are you allowed to have those opinions? Are you allowed to even say that to your Protestant brothers and sisters? Or the minute that you admit that maybe there's something about this particular thing or something else that you're not comfortable with, are they going to pounce on you and then try to use that as a way to prove Catholicism to be false? You see, that's what we really need to be talking about, isn't it? When it comes to this, I do want to throw one thing out to people who just want to go, oh, evil Pope Francis called everybody to prayer. I want to throw this out and ask this question. What was he supposed to do? What would you have had him do? Was he supposed to say, when this community of higher faith formation or whatever comes along, was he supposed to just say, no, I'm not calling everybody to prayer. I'm not doing that. I don't know. Is he supposed to do it? Now some people say, yes, he shouldn't even be a part of that group. He shouldn't have anything to do with these people. Do you feel like that's really what you want from the leader of the Catholic Church, to have nothing, no relationship, no dialogue, no basically any kind of good standing with leaders of other faiths? Is that what we expect of him? I don't know that that's what we should want. I don't know about that. I don't think that for him to be in these relationships and have this dialogue together for the purpose of open communication in a peaceful world where we can share with each other and respect each other, I don't think that having that means that we're in some sort of heretical mindset. Now, I think that that's the context of this call to prayer, and I think that has to mean something. Now, so if you just want to talk specifically about that, how do you answer that? I think what you say, Belinda, is this. Yeah, the Pope's in relationship with all these different faith leaders, and they're trying to appeal to the instinct within the human heart to reach out to God in prayer instead of just relying on science. And I don't know that that's such a bad thing. If you're uncomfortable with that, I guess that's up to you. But that's what I think that he was doing. Okay? Now, some of the things that the Pope has done, yeah, they've bugged me. I thought the whole Pachamama thing was very troubling to me. I think this whole idea of God willing the diversity of religions, that troubles me. So, but what about the other things? There's been other things that he said and read that I've really appreciated. You know, I like the Pope's insistence on mercy. I like the Pope's focus on prayer and the things that he's done to try to build bridges with people. I don't think that makes him a bad guy. I saw Jesus doing a lot of that too. So for me, like, I don't want to just live in this one camp where I'm only going to hear negative voices and negative things and go, okay, boom, that's where we're at. Now, again, I talked about, what it was like for me to come into this as a convert and having to walk through this and get to a specific place. Belinda, maybe, I don't know, are you a convert, or is this something that you've walked into? I don't know what your relationships are like with your Protestant brothers and sisters, whether this is really an issue, but here's how I'm going to encourage everybody to respond to this. Okay. And I've got 7 things that I want to share with you quickly. Okay. And this is my own personal perspective. Okay. Number 1, remember the Catholic Church belongs to Jesus. It does not belong to the Pope. The Catholic Church is Jesus' church. And sometimes that's helpful for us to remember that Jesus said, I will build my church. He didn't say to Peter, I'm going to build your church. He said, I will build my church. Peter's the rock upon the church, which the church will be built, but the church is built by Jesus. The church belongs to Jesus. So when you're struggling with what to do with different things that are happening in leadership, remember, ultimately, Jesus is on the throne. That's a mindset, but I think it's very helpful. Number 2, remember, and you can say this to anybody you want to, the Pope is not a perfect guy. He's not going to always say things in the best way or in the clearest way. And he's not always going to say the right things. There's going to be things that he says that he probably in the back of his mind goes, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Now, I don't know which those things are. I've never heard him get up and say, well, I shouldn't have said that. But if he's like everybody else, he probably goes home at the end of the day and thinks, oh man, should I have done that? I don't know. But he's not a perfect guy. So we can't allow ourselves to be painted into a corner if he does something consistent with being an imperfect human being. Because remember, Catholics don't believe, and we've never taught that the Pope is a perfect guy. Number 3, it's not your job to judge the Pope. Okay? It's not your job to do that. And that should be something that you view as a positive. Not, oh man, but I really want to. You don't want to judge him. It's not your job. He doesn't work for you. He works for Jesus, and Jesus will judge him. It's okay for you to say at times, I'm just not really sure what to make of that. That's okay. It's okay for you not to take a position on something because you don't want to judge his heart. That's fine. Don't let someone tell you you have to do that. Number 4, it's another big one. This is huge. It's not your job to explain what Pope Francis means or says to anybody else. That's not your job. So sometimes you can just say, I don't know. I don't know. Look into what he says. I'm not sure what he meant by that. You're not the Pope's spokesperson. You're not his communication office. That's on him to explain what he says. You don't have to do that. So again, if you're ever uncomfortable with trying to explain something the Pope says or does, just don't do it. You don't have to. It's not your job. Number 5, it is your job to obey God and follow the official teaching of the church. Okay? That's your job. That's my job. And that isn't going to change no matter whether we have a pope that says everything we like, or whether we have a pope that says some stuff we don't like, or whether we have a pope that says everything that we don't like. We don't get to pick and choose. We don't get to say, well, I'll only follow the church if we have a pope that says what we like. Our job is to be obedient to God and to follow the teaching of the church no matter what. That doesn't change. And for most of us, that's going to take up a pretty good chunk of our energy and effort. And that's what we need to be focused on more than trying to figure out whether or not the Pope meant this or the Pope meant that. Number 6, if what the Pope says bothers you that much, stop paying attention. Stop going on his Twitter. Stop reading all the articles. Stop following it on social media. You don't have to pay attention to all of that. For the vast majority of Catholicism, most people didn't even know what their Pope looked like or ever heard him speak a word or read a word that he said. For the vast majority, okay? Now, granted, popes would write encyclicals and they'd be read to people, or people could see what they were, if they could read or whatever. But this whole thing now where we have every 5 minutes there's a tweet coming from the Pope, like, that's not something you have to be involved in, because that can be good or bad depending on your perspective, okay? Number of factors. Number 1, what he says, okay? Number 2, your personal opinions about it. And then number 3, how that's being filtered through things that are going on. And if that's too much for you, for whatever reason, then just stop. Don't get caught up in it. Don't turn it on. Now, I know that might be like, it's hard to say to a Catholic, right? Don't listen to what your Pope says. But I'm not talking about if the Pope comes out and makes a declaration of something to be definitively true, or something like really, really important. I'm talking about just the random thoughts he has throughout the day, or the things that go through his mind, or how he's dealing with particular political issues or things that he has to deal with because he's the Pope in this world. If it stresses you out, just quit paying attention to it. All right, number 7, lastly, in all things, pray for the Pope and follow Jesus into holiness. Pray for him do you pray for him as much as you criticize him? I know some people do. Some people are like, yeah, I really struggle with everything he does, but I pray for him every day. That's awesome. Keep it up. Pray for him more. Pray for the church. Pray for an ability for the world to receive what he says and know what he means clearly, and for that to glorify God. Pray for him. Trust God to deal with this. You don't need the Pope to tell you how to live tomorrow. You already know how to live tomorrow. We've already got enough church teaching that tells us how to do that. So focus on yourself. Focus on holiness. Focus on following what you do know to be true. Focus on all of that and get that down. That's more important than trying to understand something that's hard to understand, okay? Trust God with this. Remember the promise that brought you into the faith, and for those of us converts, that brought us into the church. That promise is still true. The promise was that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. That's still true. The promise wasn't that the Pope would always say the perfect thing. The Pope was that no matter what happens, the gates of hell will not prevail against Jesus Christ's church. Focus on that. See, if you don't think that Jesus can handle all this stuff that's going on right now in the church, then you don't understand the awesome power of the promise that he made to his church. You don't understand what it means to be Catholic. See, if it weren't for the promise of God's protection around his church, we'd all be toast, wouldn't we? But the good news is that promise is true. It was true in the Arian heresy of the 4th century. It was true in the abuses that happened in the 15th and 16th centuries. It is true when there was a time in history when 3 people claimed to be the Pope at the same time. It's been true throughout this modernist crisis that we're experiencing. It's all been true all the time. And I know some people want to argue about that and go, yeah, but we've never had a crisis like what we have now. Okay, well, guess what? We still have a promise that the gates of hell will not prevail against Jesus' church. So let's cling to that. Whenever you're challenged by a non-Catholic who wants to point at something the Pope says as a proof that Catholicism can't be true, then ask them this. Belinda, this is the question that you can ask to your Protestant friend who's challenging you. Ask them this. Well, what do you do when the leader of your church does or says something that you disagree with? What do you do? Do you just bail and walk away? Do you go start a new church? Or do you just live in open rebellion? Or do you just quit going altogether? Or what is it? First of all, you got to recognize that for a lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters, they don't have a leader of their faith. They might have a pastor, but really at the end of the day, in Protestantism, everybody is their own pope. Everybody sits in judgment over everybody else and decides for themselves what they believe the Christian faith to teach. And sure, they might follow this pastor or that author or that blogger or whatever, but at the end of the day, what do you do when they say or do something that you disagree with? Answer that question. I think there's very few who just say something like this. Well, I submit to that leadership even though I disagree with it or don't understand it, because I know that God has made a promise that their leadership will be guided by the Holy Spirit and be protected from ultimate error. Who says that other than us, right? So think about that. What's the alternative, friends? What's the alternative? To just throw up our hands and go, well, okay, I guess we can't be Catholics anymore. See, here's the thing. People want to say to us that you Catholics claim the Pope is perfect, and the fact that he ever says something that we struggle with means that he's not. No. Sometimes we have to go back to an explanation about what the Catholic Church truly teaches about what we mean when we say the Pope is infallible. Again, doesn't mean that he never makes a mistake or that he doesn't say anything dumb from time to time. Doesn't even mean that he doesn't say anything wrong from time to time. It means that he will not officially declare something to be true when it comes to faith and morals that isn't true. It means that he's not going to contradict a revealed dogma of the faith from God and say, oh, well, guess what? Jesus isn't really God, or we don't really have a Trinity anymore. That's what it means. And a few other things. I'm not going to get into all of that right now. Okay? But here's the deal. Don't just focus on from a standpoint of how we deal with the bad situation with regard to this promise. Focus it from the standpoint of God's goodness and grace. I think that God's grace is made manifest in this situation more than if our Pope said everything that only we agreed with. Whatever side of the coin you're on that. The fact that the Pope can say something that you struggle with or disagree with it, and you can still hold fast to the promise from Jesus that the gates of hell won't stand against his church. That's a powerful witness to who God is and what he's called us to as Catholics. So have courage enough to walk in this difficult question, Belinda, and in this difficult situation. Have courage enough to walk through it with honor and integrity, and having really wrestled through it with God yourself. Not just looking around to see what your favorite blogger or Twitter guy says so that you can be on their team. Think for yourself and trust God and trust his church. Remember, that's what we're called to when it comes to being Catholics. And man, it's awesome, isn't it? It's awesome that we can trust Jesus and we can trust that he'll get us through this difficult time. Belinda, I hope that's been helpful. I know it's a tough question, and I know that it might not be as simple as you'd like in terms of the answer, but that's okay. We don't always have a simple answer to these complicated questions. And that's part of what it means to follow God. And that's why we're Catholics. That's why we rest in that promise. I tell you what, this whole stuff, when people freak out about this, it doesn't make me want to stop being Catholic. It makes me thankful that I am Catholic, because I praise God that my Jesus is building his church, and there's nobody that can ultimately mess it up. So there you have it, Belinda. I hope that this episode has been helpful to you. I hope this answer hasn't just brought more confusion, but has helped you to walk through a difficult question, a difficult issue with confidence and humility, because that's what we're called to do as Catholics. We're humble in heart, but we have great confidence in our Lord and in His church. Friends, thanks so much for listening to this podcast. I pray that you'll share it, tell someone about it, and I hope that you will continue to seek to take those eternal truths of the Catholic faith and connect them to your everyday life. God bless you so much. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Stewardship, a mission of faith, and is also supported by our team at patreon.com/Keith Nestor. Please consider joining our support team. Catholic Feedback is a production of Down to Earth Ministries. For more information about Down to Earth or to bring me to your parish or event, visit down2earthministry.org. See you next time.